Thank you for this introduction and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Um, so I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization, but more specifically I work for the Global Soil Partnership. So I'll talk a little bit about this and then I'll talk about the International Code of Conduct for the sustainable use and management of fertilizer that was already introduced during the first day by my colleague from FAO here in Cairo, Dr. Sarraj, and by the colleague Dr. Shalabi just a couple of presentations ago. So the Global Soil Partnership is a global mechanism that was established back in 2012, and one of the main goals of the GSP, as I'm going to call it, was mostly to put soils in the global agenda. So before 2012, I feel like soils weren't talked about much, and especially after the campaign in 2015 with the International Years of Soils, we started hearing more and more about soils. The key objectives are also to promote sustainable soil management, which is a key term that was developed also during the creation of the Global Soil Partnership, and to improve soil governance at the global level. So the way that it works is that even though the Global Soil Partnership is part of FAO, we still are our own independent body. So all of the member countries that are members of FAO are also members of the Global Soil Partnership, but since we are a partnership, we can also have external partners. So far we have universities, research institutions, private sector, etc., that are also partners of the GSP, and that can help us decide what kind of activities we should be working on during our annual plenary assembly. So we are mostly guided or advised by a technical panel that's called the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, where all the different regions in the world are represented, and they provide us with their scientific guidance. So most of these people are in academia. And the whole partnership is facilitated by the GSP Secretary and the GSP Secretariat. So that would be me and my colleagues that work with me back in Rome, in FAO. And most of our work is done through our regional soil partnerships. So we try to have a few activities in all the different regions of FAO of the world. And I mentioned just now that every year we have a plenary assembly. So this is very similar to the big FAO conference that they have every year, where all the activities, they report on all the activities that they've done, and they also talk about the future activities that member countries can endorse. So we also have a yearly meeting that's in June, where all of our partners are invited, and we report on the different activities that we have worked on during the past year. And then we also talk about what we want to do and ask member countries and other partners what they wish for us to do. So it's very open. These are the different regional soil partnerships that we have. So we have North America, which is not very active, as well as Europe, active in their own way because they have their own mechanisms. But the regions that need us the most, where we work the most, are the Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, Near East and North Africa, Asia, and a little bit for the Southwest Pacific, mostly the islands. So the way that the GSP works is through 5 pillars of action. We have the first one, pillar 1 is our overarching pillar, which is the one on the promotion of sustainable soil management. Most of our activities fall under this one, but then we have more specific pillars under which we have more specific activities. For example, pillar 2 is on encouraging investment, technical cooperation, policy, education, awareness, and extension and soil. So I don't know if you've heard, for example, of World Soil Day, but every year on the 5th of December, we celebrate World Soil Day. And we have been, thanks to this pillar and the activities that my colleagues in communications have been doing, World Soil Day is celebrated more and more in many more countries every year, and it's become a priority for many member countries to celebrate this important day and to give the importance to soils. Our third pillar is on research and development. Our fourth pillar is on soil data and soil information systems. So, for example, under this pillar, we produce maps. One of the first maps that we produced was on soil organic carbon. Currently, we are working on a global map for soil erosion, one on soil salinity, actually with colleagues from ICBA, so every year we're doing a different map, and hopefully in 2021 we will be having a symposium on soil fertility, and we will therefore also have a global map on soil fertility. And finally, our fifth pillar is on harmonization, because even though soil scientists have quite a lot of methods, measurements, they're not harmonized throughout the globe, which makes working together a little bit tough. So we're trying to come up with some standard operational procedures in order to make sure that all of us are on the same page. One of the first documents that our technical panel that I mentioned earlier has worked on is the status of the world soil resources. And that was basically just to see what the status quo was, what's the status of our soils, and do we have any threats that we need to address immediately. And they came up with this list that you see right here with the main threats to our soil functions. So here we have soil erosion, organic carbon change, nutrient imbalance, salinization, soil sealing and land take, loss of soil biodiversity, soil contamination or soil pollution, acidification, compaction, and waterlogging. What we have been doing since 2017 is having a technical, more scientific, but also we have some economic background and policy in these symposia. So every year we are trying to hold a symposium. So every year it's in FAO headquarters in Rome, and each year we're trying to address one of these main threats. So far we have had one symposium on soil organic carbon, we've had one on soil pollution, we've had one on soil erosion this past May. Next month in March, if you are interested in joining, we have our global symposium on soil biodiversity, and we will have our symposium on soil salinity in October 2020, and next year in 2021 we will be holding our symposium on soil fertility, and I think that might be more interesting for the industry to attend. So as I mentioned before, one of the main goals of the GSP has been the promotion of sustainable soil management, and also one of the first things that was done during the creation of the Global Soil Partnership was revising the World Soil Charter that FAO already had from the 80s. So it was a document from the 80s that was signed by all member countries that was then revised in 2015. And then Dr. Shalaby mentioned the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management. That's also where we have defined what sustainable soil management is. This is the definition that you see on the screen. And then we have also provided a few guidelines that are a direct response to the threats that I just mentioned in the last slide. And this brings me to the International Code of Conduct for the Sustainable Use and Management of Fertilizers, which is the document that was already presented. So this is really one of the tools that we are trying to provide different stakeholders to implement these voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management. So even though these guidelines address all of the threats, all of the issues that I mentioned earlier, they don't really go in depth. So we only have a few sentences of what should be done in order to address these issues. But then we are also working on individual documents, normative, whether they're normative or technical, in order to address these issues. And so there goes the fertilizer code. This code was endorsed back in August 2019 with all member countries of FAO endorsing the code during the FAO conference. So this is the highest body of FAO. And it was a response not only to the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management, because this is a document that is only proper to the GSP, but it's also it was also a response to the Committee on Agriculture, which is also one of FAO's main bodies, to intensify its food safety work and technical support to smallholders at local level concerning the safe use of fertilizers. So that was a direct response to this. The Sustainable Development Goals have been mentioned many times, but in this fertilizer code, we're trying to address, whether directly or indirectly, the SDGs 2, 3, 6, 13, and 15 on zero hunger, which has been mentioned many times, but also on human health through nutrition, on clean water, on climate change, and on life on land. And finally, also back in 2016, UN Environment had a third resolution, and they have asked FAO to work on the issue of soil pollution. So this code also addresses soil contamination from fertilizers and how we can better manage fertilizers in order to avoid this issue. So why this code? We've had a lot of our member countries come to us and asked us to develop this code to talk both about the positive impacts of fertilizer use, so increase, for example, in agricultural productivity, which is much needed, but also about the negative impacts, such as greenhouse gas emissions or nutrient excess. The presentation right before mine mentioned quite a lot of these. And we want to focus really on the misuse of fertilizers. So we want to talk about, the code mentions the underuse of fertilizers. So there's a lot of areas where fertilizers are not used in the right amount. So we want to increase the use of fertilizers in these regions. But there's also many regions that are overusing fertilizers. We also want to talk about misuse. So in areas where it has nothing to do with the quantity. So going back to the 4R nutrient stewardship, anything but quantity. If fertilizers are not used properly, we need to provide countries with a framework that they can use in order to create policy, or not only policy, but also technical documents that can help their local fertilizers users make the right decisions. Countries also talk to us about fertilizers being expensive in some regions or being inaccessible, so not even only an issue of money. Many countries have also told us that they have had issues with poor quality fertilizers getting to them, so fertilizers not being labeled properly, or fertilizers having big bags split into smaller bags, and the quality is decreasing every time the fertilizer is being sold to new stakeholder. And finally, because we are the Global Soil Partnership, we really wanted to also look at fertilizers and fertilizer use and management from a more holistic perspective that looks at sustainable soil and nutrient management. So in that document that I mentioned at the very beginning that our technical panel worked on, they really did a review based on the different regions that I mentioned earlier, and they saw that in the NENA region there was that agriculture or agricultural production was indeed constrained by nutrient availability in a few cases. In the region we also have a lot of land use pressure and intensification of cropping system, which is degrading the land and also decreasing productivity in the long term and also in the short term, and we're already seeing that in a few countries, in a few areas. And then the region also has its own issues that don't have much to do with fertilizers, but for example soil salinization, soil organic carbon loss, and there's also a few hotspots of soil pollution in the NENA region. I don't think you can read this, but I invite all of you to take a look at the publications that I'm mentioning right now, the status of the world soil resources. There's a summary, there's the long version. Summary, I recommend the summary. The long version is a few hundred pages, but it has these tables for each regions, and it gives you a summary of which threats are most important per region. So the aim of this fertilizer code that was published not long ago was to promote the responsible and judicious use of fertilizers in order to prevent, as I mentioned, inappropriate use, underuse, and overuse of fertilizers. And also to assist member countries, because they have requested that at our plenary assembly, to design policies, to design regulatory frameworks for the sustainable use of fertilizers. So the way that the document is structured is that we have set out a list of roles for different roles, responsibilities, actions for different stakeholders. And the stakeholders mentioned in this fertilizer code are governments, the fertilizers and nutrient recycling industry, agricultural extension and advisory services, research and academia, and also, of course, farmers or any fertilizer end users. And we want I really want to stress the same way as my colleague did in the last presentation, is that by fertilizers, this fertilizer code is not only about synthetic and mineral fertilizers, but when we're talking about fertilizers, it's about also organic fertilizers and also reused and recycled nutrients. So this is the table of content. We have a few more normative, introductory articles, and then we have more technical ones, which are the 3, 4, 5 on soil fertility and plant nutrition, fertilizer use and management, nutrient reuse and recycling. And the publication, the Fertilizer Code, is available in all 6 official UN languages, so it's available in Arabic, and I'm not sure if you will have access to the PowerPoints after, but I put a link, or you can just put Fertilizer Code FAO and it will be the first link coming up. This fertilizer code is similar to other code of conducts that we have in FAO. So first I want to stress that these codes, even though they are called code of conducts, are voluntary in nature. So of course, if countries want to adopt or do something with them, use them to design policies or regulatory framework, they are more than welcome to, and we will assist them with that. If countries already have an established regulatory framework that's dealing with fertilizer use and management, no need for this code at all. And we also, like other codes of conduct, review these documents quite regularly. So depending on when it's needed, and together with all the different stakeholders mentioned in this fertilizer code, we plan on reviewing this fertilizer code every 5 to 10 years. So in terms of implementation, at our last plenary assembly, we asked our member countries what they needed help with. And just to mention again some of the issues, but they really wanted to have policies or regulatory frameworks that mention these particular issues. So registration and regulation systems for fertilizers, availability of quality fertilizers in underserved areas, fertilizer quality control, policy formulation, and capacity development. And right now what the GSP and FAO is working on is the implementation of this code. So right now the first step has just been disseminating this fertilizer code, so we're trying to talk about it. This is also part of what I'm doing right now. We are also working on educational material that we are distributing through our different programs and activities that are based directly on the fertilizer code. But the next step will be to actually pilot the use of this fertilizer code in different countries. So if you are interested in taking part of this implementation, whether you are a member country or the industry, then you can get in touch with me or anyone else in FAO or the Global Soil Partnership. And finally, this is just an example of what it looks like. So we have different articles, and it tells you, for example, by stakeholders, what each stakeholder should be doing. So it will talk, for example, the fertilizer industry should, or the governments should, based on scientific evidence, etc. And then we have different items that are mentioned. So I think that the fertilizer code is quite easy to use, not many pages. I have a few copies, unfortunately not enough for everyone, but I will put them in the front after the rest of this session if you want to take a look at what the fertilizer code looks like. And finally, I like ending a little bit my presentations with this poster, because when we talk, whenever I go to a conference and I talk about soil fertility or the fertilizer code, this is really mentioning mostly one of the ecosystem services that soils are part of, and that one is food production. But soils deliver many ecosystem services, and we should really take care of them. So we have climate regulation, nutrient cycling, habitat for organisms, so biodiversity, flood regulation. Soils are also a big source of pharmaceuticals and genetic resources. Yeah, they provide us with construction materials and many other ecosystem services that I think are crucial for life on land. So we should really invest in our soils, especially with all the different issues that we're facing right now, such as climate change mitigation and adaptation, with healthy soils having the potential for carbon sequestration. And I also invite all of you, as I said earlier, member countries are not the only ones that can be partners of the Global Soil Partnership. So if you just go to the website and click on partners, as you see here in the screen, then you can see the list of our current partners, and you can also fill out the form and become a partner of the Global Soil Partnership. I think that's it for me, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.